Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our international audience for this, the latest in Science Business's series of high-profile public webcasts about international research and innovation policy. And it's a big news day here in Brussels with President Joe Biden meeting with European leadership to discuss, amongst other things, the new Trade and Technology Council, green tech cooperation, and more. But I'm first and foremost going to welcome you on behalf of Science Business, Europe's leading R&I policy organization, news service, and an international network of 70 institutional members who are driving and informing the public debate on what should come next in research and development and technology policy. And today's webcast is a little unique. I'm going to be joined by Richard Hudson, our editor-in-chief, who is sitting in Washington, DC, and we are going to hear more from him presently. But first, and very quickly, an open invitation for you to contribute during this webcast. You can do so in one of two different ways, either by entering a question on Slido, if you're watching on our website, or via the live Q&A function for those watching on our Events Air platform. Now, back to the hot topic, changing climate. With Biden in Washington, what's next for global climate and energy R&D? And it goes without saying that there's been a huge amount of energy here in Brussels, and I think also in Washington, following the announcement of President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan, the big pledges and commitments on energy and climate research and development, plus, of course, the recommitment to the Paris Agreement and multilateral action on climate-related issues. And so the timing from a US perspective is great. It's also great from a Brussels perspective, as next week the European Commission launches the bulk of Horizon Europe, its next multi-year R&I program, with around 30 to 35 billion in funding committed to climate-related projects in the next 7 years. So, how will this all work in practice? That is the key topic for today's event. And we're delighted to be joined by three very eminent guests who will be on the front line of making transatlantic cooperation a reality going forward. First and foremost, Congressman Don Beyer, the representative of Virginia's 8th District, the US Congress, chair of the House Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, and co-chair of the Congressional Safe Climate Caucus. Second, Beth Urbanus, the Acting Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the US Department of Energy. And third, Patrick Child, Deputy Director General for Research and Innovation at the Commission, and the current chair of the Mission Innovation Steering Committee. So a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I suggest we go straight into the content. And let's begin with the Biden administration's $2 trillion infrastructure plan. This obviously contains significant amounts of money that are going to flow into different areas of climate and energy related R&D. So in the context of advancing global cooperation, what's the single most important proposal in your view? Congressman Beyer, let's start with you.
Let me break that into two pieces. I think the single most important piece is simply, once again, committing US leadership to climate change. And you see this in so many different ways, including the president's first trip to Europe, to re-engaging with Paris, John Kerry as our climate ambassador to the world, Gina McCarthy used to head the US EPA, taking over climate at the White House. And then concretely, it's the, as you say, the many billions of dollars in the Biden early legislation for climate infrastructure. I think it's probably got the most attention in the US is the electrification of automobility as we shift to electric cars and buses and trucks. But it's many, many other pieces of our overall environmental infrastructure, including everything from coastal resilience to phasing out coal-fired power plants. You know, we've been, I think early on, we made the point that we continued to get better on climate through Bush, Obama, and even Trump years. But now we have a president who's also said this is going to be his top priority.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Beyer. Now, Beth, let's turn to you first. Department of Energy, what's your perspective on the recent proposals? What has you and your colleagues most excited, in particular, in this international partnership context?
Well, I think we're excited about a lot of issues and a lot of areas for research and development and technical cooperation, particularly with Europe. Like Congressman Beyer, I think what I do see a big change in this administration in terms of the focus on climate in general and all that we do internationally and all of our diplomacy, all our strategic approaches that we are designing and implementing. It's there everywhere. The high level folks like Secretary Kerry and also Secretary Granholm and of course Gina McCartney. I think it's an important signal to the world that the United States is serious and that this is going to be a stepped up priority. And it's going to be one of the key issues in all of our international engagement around the world. In terms of the most exciting technologies, I think we have an approach at the Department of Energy, and we are blessed to have 17 national laboratories, fantastic program offices that work with them and design and implement, work with them to design and implement research and development programs. And to be frank with you, at the Department of Energy, we're looking at just about everything. Now, that doesn't mean that everything gets the same focus, but we do feel like a wide variety of technical options is required to address the climate crisis that we're all facing. The IEA itself estimates that over 50% of technologies needed to achieve net zero goals by 2050 are pre-commercial today. So the pace and scale of innovation must accelerate across the board to effectively address climate change. And as we know, different regions of the world are going to require different solutions to decarbonize their economies and to adapt to climate change. Each country is going to have its own approach. For example, we need creative solutions for decarbonizing shipping in industrial sectors. That's a high priority for this administration that I think is a bit of a new one. We need next generation battery technologies. That's something that the US and others have been working on for years. And we need more resilient and smarter electricity transmission and distribution systems, and much, much more, including in the civil nuclear area. So the Department of Energy will continue to do research in these areas. We'll continue to work with the private sector and continue to work with the academic community, the science community, and our partners overseas, and particularly the EU, to move forward to make sure that we have the technologies and approaches we need and the analytical tools and systems to help countries, including our own, determine their clean energy path to abate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and try to address climate change. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. Now, Patrick, I'll turn to you next. This must be music to your ears. I mean, there was a certain sense of relief, I think, when the Biden administration started moving forward with the Paris Agreement and other climate-related things. So what really stands out for you in these plans as the sort of the key messages for Europe and the alignment with EU policy ambitions?
Well, Simon, thanks for having me here. And I mean, we're meeting, as you said, at an absolutely amazing moment as our leaders are meeting just along the street for the first EU-US summit with the new administration. And as you say, I mean, extremely optimistic agenda against the back also of the very successful G7 meeting the last few days with climate and research and innovation, at center stage of many of the things that we're doing. So, of course, the United States has for a long time been the leading research and innovation partner for the European Union. And so now that we've got such strong alignment on some of our priorities, whether it's the climate change agenda, whether it is the response to the pandemic and our cooperation in the area of health, or the emerging and cross-cutting challenges of the digital transition, as we work together on the sort of post-COVID recovery strategies. So I think we've got a really powerful agenda to work with. Specifically on the climate research agenda, I mean, some of the things that stand out for me, I mean, you mentioned mission innovation. I mean, of course, as sort of chair of the steering committee of mission innovation, really delighted to see the Department of Energy and Secretary Granholm, John Kerry, recommitting to this really forward-looking agenda where we are with other like-minded countries committed to bringing clean, affordable energy solutions for all. And the fact that the United States is stepping up to host the next year's ministerial, I think, could not be a clearer signal of their commitment on that. Very, very welcome. And we're also looking at areas like marine research, in particular through our cooperation in the All-Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. And perhaps the other thing that stands out for me is on biodiversity and the international bioeconomy forum, alongside, of course, the overarching collaboration that we're developing within the climate change, the COP process, as we look forward to Glasgow this year. So a really exciting moment, lots to get our teeth into, and that both we, with our nearly 100 billion Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Framework Program, and this really amazing package coming out of the new administration, I think gives us a huge opportunity, but also responsibilities looking forward.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is Rich Hudson over here in Washington. Congressman, I'm going to come to you on this point. We've just had, the US and the world has just had 4 years of Trump. Why should anybody in the world believe what Americans have to say about climate now?
Well, Rich, thanks for the easy question. As Beth pointed out, the Department of Energy and its wonderful career civil servants continued to push for clean energy and to fight climate change through the Trump years. I mean, yes, Donald Trump had a particular focus, which, sort of at the worst case, erased all mention of climate change from so many federal documents. But America continued to move forward. And you see this in our businesses. Business after business have moved to much lower carbon inputs and outputs. I think for me, probably the single best example is when I joined the Science Committee 7 years ago, virtually every Republican on the Science Committee thought that climate change wasn't real, or if it was real, it wasn't caused by humans, or if humans did cause it, there's nothing you could do about it. Now I find, we did a Ways and Means hearing last year on climate, and every Republican on the committee says this is real and we have to do something about it. There's still a gap often politically between the regulation that Democrats would tend to do and the innovation that Republicans would hope for. But everyone knows that we have to do something right now.
But there's still a gap.
That's a major change.
Congressman, there's still a gap also, though, between, if you look at the polls, between what those who identify as Republican voters, I'm talking about, think about climate versus those who are Democratic. So, I mean, there's still a possibility that next year there'll be new elections, Congress could change again. And then do things start to
That is very true, Rich, and this is a challenge in America that goes far beyond just climate, even though that may be the existential crisis, to an America that's deeply divided, not just in terms of its political views, but on the facts that it chooses to believe are real. We have two different stories about America right now, and I think a major challenge for our leaders is bringing us back together. It's one of the reasons I'm so hopeful about Joe Biden, who is by nature a healer and not a demonizer, and we're going to need that for many years to come from politicians of all parties.
Okay, Patrick, I'm going to come to you really quickly on this point. So how, given the volatility of American politics, how are you going to handle this at the Commission?
Well, I think that we in Europe are proud to have been sort of champions of the climate agenda, consistently over a long period, and that with the European Green Deal established by President von der Leyen in 2019, and setting ourselves the objective to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. I mean, I think we really sort of set a very powerful course, and it's really great to have such sincere and committed now engagement with the new Biden-Harris administration. I mean, one of the first visits abroad with John Kerry was to come to visit the Commission. He's established a really excellent relationship with our Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans, who's leading our climate agenda. And that is then feeding through into our engagement at different levels. I also agree with the Congressman that notwithstanding the political orientations of the previous administration, we were still working very hard with many different interlocutors in the United States, whether at the level of individual states or industry, the scientific community, and at the level of funding for clean energy research, which also produces very obvious business and commercial opportunities in the US, remained at a very encouragingly high level. So we're really happy now to have a sort of clearer political landscape within which to engage. And I think that the urgent challenge is so great that we need now to move ahead together.
Okay, all right. Patrick, you don't have a 2.5 year plan now or something to deal with the US.
We are very happy to be engaging with the US administration, which is in place, and we are really determined as we look forward to the COP in Glasgow later this year to sort of bring together the global community around the biggest challenge facing the planet. I can do this all day.
Yeah, that was an unfair question. I know. I just wanted to torture you. Dawn, if I could come back to you, another aspect of perspective on this, particularly for those outside the US, it's very confusing as we read the news about all of the legislation on R&D and on climate that's going through the Congress. Just this past week, there was the big news from the Senate of a huge R&D bill that they have proposed. There's bills in the House. So what should we pay attention to?
Patrick, you should update your computer every hour to see what the reality is. It's incredibly confusing and fast moving. And I think Beth would concur that the founding fathers and mothers wanted things to move slowly, and they do. And right now we're struggling with virtually no overlap between Democrats and Republicans on politics, which is a difficult place to be. And we're seeing the filibuster, which is unique to the American political system, was not part of our Constitution, play a much, much larger role in stopping legislation. So, one of the first actions I learned is that a week is a long time in politics, and Washington today, an hour or two is a long time in politics. So I can't give you any easier answer, except that I still believe very sincerely that most people want a major infrastructure deal. It's way overdue. Climate will be a big, big part of it. Whether it ends up being a small bipartisan piece and another piece does not, that's totally partisan, but something will happen. And it will happen probably in the next 60 days.
But it seems that there does seem to be consensus on both Republicans and Democrats in both houses on the idea of a major increase in R&D funding. Is that right?
Well, very, very much so. And that's something that everyone can agree on. And it's a place where we have led. I know, Beth's Department of Energy with all their incredible laboratories and all of our small entrepreneurs. My Republican pals would prefer that we only did innovation to get out of it, and we're probably going to need a mix to move forward.
Oh, I see. So innovation is kind of like a safe political space compared to actual law regulation.
Well, we always talk about how refrigerators in 1975 used twice as much energy as they do today. If we can only find a lot more refrigerator examples, things would be good. California and Virginia now are the first two states that have committed to zero emission vehicles, I think by 2030 or 2035. So as other states follow, there will be lots of innovation that has to catch up with state laws.
Okay, thank you. Beth, if I could come to you now, let's talk a little more detail about international collaboration on climate R&D, research and innovation. Can you give us an example, a specific example or two of initiatives that you are planning that are actually going to be about collaborating more internationally on R&D for climate?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm probably going to have to go over more than one or two, but there are we have a lot, and actually Patrick mentioned a few of them. We are re-engaging with the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation in a way that we haven't seen for a few years.
Well, hold on, let me stop you there just for a second. For those I'm a print guy. For those viewers who haven't been following it, what is Mission Innovation?
Mission Innovation is a multilateral approach, and Patrick knows a lot more about it than I do, but where countries come together voluntarily, they work together. It was launched around the Paris agreements and the climate negotiations several years ago. And what it does is it issues challenges and specific work streams for countries to work together as they like. They get to choose the areas that they work on specific missions in essentially advanced technologies in clean energy and approaches to climate. Patrick, did I get that right?
No, you're perfect, Beth. I mean, and we just had this amazing ministerial level meeting with participation of Secretary Granholm and Vice President Timmermans, our commissioner, as well as ministers from 20 or so countries, recommitting themselves around the future agenda for mission innovation, which, just to give it a slightly more concrete flavor, around these three missions on hydrogen, on renewables in the power sector, and on clean shipping. And sort of sustainable fuel for shipping. And we're looking forward to Glasgow, when we hope to have some additional thematic topics to announce. The other thing that I think comes out very strongly from mission innovation is an attempt to find new ways of promoting public-private engagement. So, another thing that was sort of announced at the ministerial gathering was a very new form of partnership between the European Commission with President von der Leyen and Bill Gates on up to $1 billion new sort of catalyst program to address some of the technology challenges where the green premium, as Bill Gates calls it, the cost of going for a clean solution rather than a traditional fossil fuel solution is perhaps greatest. And in areas, again, like hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, long-term battery storage, and direct air capture. So these are the sort of things that come out of mission innovation, but it's a group of countries, 22 countries representing something like 95% of the global research and innovation in clean energy, where we are trying to sort of lead the international debate in a positive direction, which doesn't only benefit our countries, but the international community more generally, including
how much money is committed now, and how much do you expect or plan to expect to come from this?
Well, I mean, if you add up all of the projected publicly funded R&I for all of the countries committed, you get to some astronomical 100 billion figures. What we think is that the annual increase since the Paris Agreement, so what we've actually delivered in terms of increased investment, not what we are declaring we might like to see, is something like 18.5 billion euros of research and innovation funding across the membership per year. And that's a really substantial uplift by comparison to what we had before. But we need also to use that money in a clever and intelligent way, focusing on results and using it to leverage as much as we can, support the de-risking of also private sector investment and industrial progress.
Beth, are there again, let's stick with this mission.
So on the U.S. side of the ledger, we are stepping in to co-lead on zero emission shipping, which is very new for our department and very exciting for us. We've been doing hydrogen for many years, but we will be co-leading the hydrogen mission and mission innovation. And obviously the U.S. And particularly the Department of Energy has been working on this issue for a long time and has a lot of experience. We've also announced an Earthshot program. There will be a series of them announced through the year by Secretary Granholm, and the department will be specifically starting advanced programs.
Earthshot, what's that?
So Earthshot is a new program at the department, and it's designed to increase focus and funding on specific technologies to be developed with partners in the private sector and obviously our laboratory system and academia. All of the programs will have a specific target that they are trying to achieve. We've just announced the beginning of the Earthshot program on hydrogen, and the focus of that program is on bringing down the price of hydrogen so that it can be absolutely commercially viable and utilized in a variety of ways and sectors. And so that program was just announced just a few weeks ago, or maybe about a month ago. And so we will be moving forward. There will be several other Earthshots that will be announced. I don't know which ones will be selected. There's kind of a little contest within DOE going on. But we will be announcing those, so stay tuned on that.
This is, Beth, I have to say this is a little bit amusing in that after Apollo, the EU launched missions and Japan has launched moonshots, and now you're coming back to Earthshots?
I think we need to focus on the Earth a little bit. Not that DOE isn't interested in the moon or other places as well. We do make the propulsion systems for NASA, for some of their satellites. But
okay, but on the different activities that you mentioned, it isn't clear to me what's the international role in them? I mean, that's what you're planning, but how does this coordinate with what the Commission is planning or the Japanese government?
So all of these initiatives in MI are in full coordination with the Commission and with EU member states. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, all of our domestic programs, particularly in research and development, are open to participation from scientists, research and development organizations, and companies abroad. So we have a very open system. Of course, we have to be very careful and vet very carefully that system. But we have many programs, including some of the research and development programs that we're talking specifically about here, where we have active collaboration already with European countries, European scientists, and others. And so it's a very important part of what DOE does to try to leverage the scientific community, research and development community more broadly.
Okay. Dawn, if I could come to you, what do you think about this mission innovation plan and activity?
I think it's terrific. And I'm really grateful that there are those three specific focuses. Parallel to this, and maybe not redundant, but on top of it, there's a major initiative in the US now looking at alternative fuels for air transport. We had a big science committee hearing about a month ago, which focused first on the alternative fuels, but not just that, building planes with different structures, different wing patterns. There's a major initiative on electric airplanes. And I know sooner or later we'll probably talk about fusion energy, because there are now 23 different companies, private companies in the US working on fusion, 9 specifically trying to do it. And National Academy of Sciences has come out and said we should have an operational plant by the late 2030s. And which, while that seems far away, it's a lot closer than it's been for most of our lives. And frankly, the commercial people all think that they can do it faster with some more government support. So it's a very exciting place. And as Beth and Patrick know well, when you're when there's no radioactive residue and your raw material is rock and salt water, and you can do it in urban settings, it's the holy grail.
Simon, I think we had a question that came in on fusion anyway, didn't we?
Yes, slightly provocative one, which essentially said, is it not time for a kind of scientific audit of nuclear fusion? We've been doing this for 70 years and we're still waiting. So perhaps, Congressman, if you'd like to go first, and then Patrick, give us your thoughts. I mean, the EU's obviously been a major actor in this field as well. But Congressman, what do you think about what should come next in terms of nuclear fusion and priorities?
Well, I think there's certainly nothing wrong with an audit. And ITER, which the U.S. is a contributor to, is moving slowly but surely. It's a huge industrial effort. And we need to continue to do that.
Demonstrator for fusion in southern France, correct?
Yeah, exactly, Rich. Thank you. But we also can't ignore the fact that, as we see in pharmaceuticals and so many other places, the value of the small independent entrepreneur, who, by the way, tend to mostly be MIT and Caltech professors. These are not people in their garages. And in fact, sort of the basic idea is, look, we just came up with vaccines for this deadly pandemic in about 2 months, had them in people's arms in 10 months. We shortened that period by 90%. We were trying to get people out of the idea that fusion is always going to be 50 years or 25 years away, and we can do it in this decade if we focus on it, if we make it a priority.
But there is quite a bit of disagreement internationally on the subject of fusion. Particularly in Europe, there are many politicians and voters who are opposed to it, following what happened with Chernobyl and Fukushima.
And Rich, one of the very first things, I think the first things the physicist at MIT taught me is not to say nuclear fusion, because it raises Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island. And I think, our congressional effort right now is mostly one of education, to teach people that fusion is not the same as fission. And obviously, from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission perspective, that's also going to be essential.
Well, what can one do in the R&D to assure the safety of fusion trials and demonstrators?
I think the first thing to recognize is that the safety concerns are de minimis. When a fusion plant stops working, it just stops working. There's no explosive potential there. And from a nuclear waste standpoint, you have a beam of neutrons, and that's about all. So I think it's mostly just teaching people that when you put two hydrogen atoms together, you get a helium atom and a neutron, and nothing else bad happens.
Okay, Patrick, on this fusion point, though, how big is the Commission's investment in ITER right now? It's quite, the EU's investment, it's quite large. And so will anything about this change because of the new US administration?
Well, I mean, as the congressman has said, I mean, the fusion program has been a long-term global commitment, and we're really the scale of the investments that we're making in projects like ITER, or before that the JET project in Culham, to try and develop nuclear fusion at this sort of very large scale. These sort of investments and the technologies behind them require global commitment. And so we have the US, we have the Chinese, we have the Koreans, so we have many European participants, and it's a long-term thing. I mean, my best joke on coming to your question on the audit of fusion is that these guys sort of say, well, we spent billions and billions of dollars over many years. What have we got back from it? And the answer is, well, at least we got the water back. Because of course that's the basic ingredient of nuclear fusion. So I mean, we are committed under our recently adopted multi-annual financial framework to maintain our share of the ITER project. I don't have the exact figure in my mind, but it's in the sort of hundreds of millions, billions sort of orders of magnitude. I mean, like the congressman, I would like to see us accelerate progress on delivering our demonstration scale nuclear fusion. And that, I think, means involving more and more, not only the scientists, who of course have a fundamental role to play, but also the engineers and the project managers. And I was able to visit the Cadarache plant in southern France, where the ITER project is being developed, which is now under the leadership of Bernard Bigot, a real professional. And he has really gripped the project and got it moving in a very impressive way. Of course, there will be hurdles. This sort of major infrastructure program will bring hurdles, but I'm optimistic that we are going in the right direction. And even if it will not come in time for us to save the planet for climate change, which used to be the main argument for fusion, it is such a major game changer if we can get it right. If we similarly can achieve what this congressman is talking about on the sort of small modular reactors, that would also be a real game changer as well. But we have been working on that as well for a while and haven't yet found the silver bullet. And contrary to the sort of health program where we have vaccines that work for other rather similar sort of illnesses, with the small modular reactors, unfortunately, we haven't yet got the sort of demonstration, even at a small scale, that it works. But we're working on it.
Well, we've talked briefly about hydrogen and shipping, and it was mentioned, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But a question specifically on the process, the structure for EU-US collaboration on climate R&D. Patrick, today the Commission President von der Leyen publicly said, Canada, join Horizon Europe. I mean, this has been talked about for 3 years. Nothing actually happened, but he said it, she said it publicly, and notably the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau did not respond, at least in his statement, on a public statement on this. So first, in the case of the US, is the Commission inviting the US to associate with Horizon Europe?
Well, Horizon Europe has only just, as you know, been sort of finally adopted by the co-legislator. And so the ink on the new provisions which open up the possibility of association to countries around the world with advanced research and innovation capacity, that ink is only just dry on the paper. And the invitation is open to any partner which can bring the commitment and enthusiasm to be an associated country. And the great news, as you just said, I mean, in the last few days, is that we have had not yet a sort of full and final decision about Canada, but we've had a clear expression of interest from the Canadian government that they want to start a process of discussion with us on association with Horizon Europe. And
you have had a formal expression of interest.
A clear signal from the Canadian side that this is what they want. Yeah.
Any indication as to how big?
I'm sorry?
Any indication as to how big, how much money?
Well, I mean, the way that it works for associated countries is that you become associated, and then you have a sort of pay-as-you-go approach to the programs and projects that researchers from your system would be part of. So it would depend on what would be then the response from the scientific community in Canada or in other associated countries as to what the sort of ultimate sort of financial envelope would look like. With the United States, we have not yet had such a signal of a request for an association agreement. I mean, but as I've said to you earlier, the EU-US collaboration on research and innovation, I mean, the US is our most successful and active partner. And so we are very optimistic that, for example, this new trade and technology sort of agreement that's emerging from the summit that's going on as we speak is going to provide us with a really exciting framework to take forward collaboration on a range of different research areas. And we've also been making some progress with colleagues in the new administration recently on some of the sort of technical legal obstacles that have in the past, I think, been a bit of a frustration in some sectors when it comes to engagement between US researchers and EU-funded research programs.
Technical obstacles? What do you mean? The contractual terms or what?
Yeah, I think that the European Union and the United States probably have the sort of highest concentration of well-paid lawyers in the world. And when you put those two communities, alongside each other with different legal frameworks to play with, you can see that things maybe don't go as smoothly or as quickly as the politicians would like. But I think that the good news is that where there is a will, there is generally a way. So just as we have we have a really excellent collaboration between the United States and Europe already established in our health programs, for example, where US beneficiaries are able to participate and receive funding from the EU program in the NIH, and that I think is very encouraging. We need now to see whether, as we deepen our collaboration, for example, with the DOE labs, and I'm very happy to have Beth with us to sort of take that conversation forward, whether we can find new ways of collaboration, which is to our mutual benefit. And that's not just about, the real thing we're trying to get is getting the scientists together, working together, and drawing on the resources that we have from our program, but also from US-funded programs to make that happen.
Okay, Beth and Dawn, if I could come to you on this question, it may seem a little bit particular about U.S. association to Horizon, but under the prior administration, we had an event where the State Department people were quite clear and on the record that there was no U.S. interest in associating to Horizon on climate or anything else. Is that going to change?
So we are certainly following very closely the potential changes that the Commission is making to some of the requirements of the program that I think have been challenging to the U.S. And I think, again, from more of a technical collaboration or legal perspective, they can make it easier for organizations that aren't getting Horizon funding to collaborate with EU institutions on Horizon projects. And I think that's very promising. The plan changes under Horizon are certainly welcome, and we are looking at them enthusiastically to see if if we can understand the details better and see about moving forward. But I do want to strongly emphasize that the US model, and I mentioned this briefly before, that the US model for research and development is very inclusive of European scientists and researchers. Just every year we get over 15,000 European scientists visiting Department of Energy national laboratories and working and collaborating. That's just the ones that come and visit. We collaborate online with European scientists all the time. Almost all of our programs in terms of research and development that are done through the Department of Energy are open to collaboration with European Commission and European country scientists and technologists. And a very good concrete example of that is the DUNE experiment, Deep Underground Neutrino experiment, which is the largest international science experiment attempted within the US, which is co-led by the University of Manchester. So it's a very concrete example of how we are working hand in hand with our European colleagues in these areas.
Okay, but just to push that question one more time, am I right to say that the U.S. is considering the possibility of association to Horizon? Or
I think we're looking at the changes, and we find them welcome, and we'll go from there.
Okay, Congressman, what do you think about this? Does the U.S. need to consider this kind of formal deal with the EU?
I think Beth gives really good answers, and I also think I hope Beth was responsible for naming the Deep Underground Neutrino experiment. DUNE is very creative. I really appreciate that. I deferred to Beth definitely on the legal framework and the some of the hassles there, but overall, it's very clear that the U.S. now wants to partner with Europe, especially, and with the rest of the world on climate change. That we don't want to go it alone. That we need to work together, and that yes, there's research and innovation, where, as Beth pointed out, there's enormous collaboration exchange already. But then there's things like climate finance, where already, our banks are looking now at figuring out what the climate risk is on the loans that they make. The collaboration that the U.S. has with Europe on public finance for carbon-intensive fuels, or phasing out government support for coal-fired power plants. All these things that aren't Horizon specifically, but are part of this partnership. I remember going back to Denmark in 2009 at the COP meeting there. The whole challenge of how can we ask the BRICS to step up to do climate when we're unwilling to do it. So, if we expect the rest of the world to come along, we have to lead. And I think we're in the position to do that now, in partnership with you.
We have it going beyond the EU level. Congressman, do you think we'll ever get to the point of having some kind of a global research council with a real budget to spend on climate R&D? Should we?
I think, yes, we absolutely should. And my long-term vision, which may be 500 years or 100 years, is that we continue to move not towards world government, but to an association of nation states working together on everything from human rights to climate. And so in the short run, from a U.S. perspective, that means overcoming the enormous challenges we have with China, specifically on human rights and the rules of the road for international trade, and for Russia with this interference in U.S. democracy. But I know this is at least part of what the Biden trip to Geneva will be this week.
Okay. Well, Simon, why don't we take some of the questions? We'll come back to this issue of China in just a moment. And by the way, for those in the audience, we are getting many questions in. If you haven't seen it already, there is a Slido page on our website, on the event page, that you can add a question. And there's also our Events Center platform where you can do so. But Simon, what do we got else from the audience? Well,
I think it's a great segue. Obviously, we'll come back to some of the priorities for COP26 towards the end of this afternoon's webcast. But one from the audience is how do the panelists see the prospects for North-South collaboration, and in particular the inclusion of Latin America and Africa in climate-related R&D? I know this is obviously something that's central to a lot of European policy thinking, but for Beth and for Don, welcome the US perspectives as well. Perhaps Patrick, if you'd like to go first.
No, I think this is a very important dimension. I mean, and clearly when you're talking about bringing global solutions, clean, affordable energy for all, there are huge communities in different parts of the world which need responses. I think it was very, very encouraging that the ministerial meeting of Mission Innovation, the Clean Energy Ministerial that we had a couple of weeks ago was hosted by Chile. And that gave us, I think, some really powerful connections with the community in Latin America. And during the ministerial discussion, it was striking how many participants underlined the importance of reaching out beyond the sort of club of members of Mission Innovation to bring solutions also to the developing world. So, for example, it's very valuable that we've got a partnership with the World Bank, and there was a director from the World Bank addressing it. We had the UN Secretary General opening the sort of launch ceremony for the next phase of Mission Innovation, and he, of course, underlined the global responsibility that we have. And we also, I think, need to recognize that not only are many of the potential commercial opportunities of developing and implementing clean energy and other climate-related solutions in developing communities, but there are also places where the technologies, can find their experimental opportunities. For example, small-scale off-grid electricity generation for rural communities. I mean, we don't have many such off-grid rural communities in Western Europe or even in North America. But in Africa or in parts of Asia, maybe some parts of Latin America, this is really the challenge. And I think that that's why it's urgent that we embrace these other partners as well. So it's good news, for example, that we have also Morocco now in the Mission Innovation family. And it was interesting to hear the Moroccan minister offering to sort of help us to develop and spread the word more broadly in Africa. And certainly that's something that Commissioner Gabriel is keen to see happening in a sort of more inclusive and open way, and as we move forward on some of these technologies.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. Beth, can I just sort of pass that on to you as well? Because, I mean, it's one thing to be inclusive and to have LATAM, Africa, emerging and developing markets around the table to talk about these issues. But then there are the investment priorities, right, in infrastructure, in capacity building, in tech transfer, etc. So how do you think about this from the Department of Energy perspective going forward?
So we have actually a very active program with North-South collaboration and also even in research and development, quite frankly. I mean, we're currently working on small modular reactor issues with Brazil as a good example in Latin America. And we also have a very active research and development program with India and the energy sector with things like CO2 looping and lots of other technologies. So our laboratories and our programs are actively engaged in actual research and development, but we are also engaged in working with countries in the South, particularly in emerging market and developing countries, to help them do a variety of things. One is we can help them as they look at their future of their energy mix and how they're going to be planning their energy sector moving forward. The laboratories have developed a wide series of toolkits, models, and other tools like that to help countries when they are looking at their energy future and to try to model and make decisions about what they're going to be bringing into their energy sector or their transportation sector or their urban sector, so that they can then gauge the impact that will have on climate change, on pricing, on a variety of modalities. And that's something that we share freely. These models have been developed in our laboratories and are available online. We also provide more specialized assistance to some countries that are looking for more specific technical solutions for their particular environments. We have some very good examples of that. We also take what the lessons we've learned in the United States and share them globally. And a great example of that is we have a program in the Caribbean that we are now expanding to the islands of the Pacific and other islands as well, about resiliency of the energy system and how you build a more resilient energy system and maintain it in the face of things like natural disasters like hurricanes and cyclones, which we suffer here, obviously in the Americas, and we see around the globe, and it's a problem to our island nations like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which we've learned a lot by working on domestically, and we can share those lessons learned with other island nations. And so that's another example of areas where we work together. So we work not only just in research and development, we work in planning and modeling with countries overseas. We can also work with policy selection tools for countries that are looking for advice. We have historically provided assistance through the Clean Energy Ministerial for Ask an Expert service, where you get to talk to a DOE expert at a laboratory if you are a country that participates in the program, and ask all the nitpicky questions you want. And we will share the research that we have, much of which is publicly available. So those are all things we do in addition to working with countries in the North-South corridor on specific technologies where they may have an edge or we may see a joint benefit.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, I come to you, a very interesting question that someone put in, and this gets back to the left-right split in American politics. So someone asks, from your experience, are there any specific climate and clean energy R&D messages that you find resonate with right-leaning Virginians? In other words, those in your constituency that think the other way. What appeals to them?
Rich, let me postpone that for just 1 second and add to Beth's excellent exposition of all the things that the U.S. government's doing with North-South and with Africa. Because on the other hand, the other important piece of this is the work on governance. That when we look at Brazil, for example, the huge problem is the deforestation. And that's only going to be solved at the political level. Or in Venezuela with the oil dependency, or Nigeria with the population that's exploding. As almost every European country is declining in population, I don't know what point Nigeria catches up with Europe by itself. And then the last time I was in India, now 3 years ago, there were still 300 million Indians without electricity. And if we begin to think about how we raise the standard of living for people across the globe, we're going to have to think very deeply, which is what tends to lead me back to trying to accelerate the fusion piece of it, because that would be, if you're trying to figure out how to solve this with fossil fuels, we're in deep, deep trouble. And on the left-right, interestingly, I think the lowest hanging fruit is the discussion around carbon pricing in the United States. We're about to move forward once again with a bipartisan Democrat-Republican House carbon pricing initiative. My little Joint Economic Committee will have the first congressional hearing on carbon pricing in the fall. We have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, certainly seen to be right of center. The Business Roundtable, many of the big oil companies like ExxonMobil have all come out to support carbon pricing. Sometimes with the hope that there will be less regulation or little regulation, but not necessarily. And what's really a little tough, Rich, is some of the pushback comes from the farther green left that doesn't want to use market mechanisms or would prefer that whatever money is raised through that be used on climate infrastructure, which would be wonderful, but may not be politically possible.
Why is it, what's the difficulty with climate infrastructure if you have a carbon tax?
Well, because Republicans have a very natural, deep-grained opposition to growing the size of government or growing government revenues. And even on the left, we get concerned about the regressive impact of increasing the price of gas and home heating fuel. So once again, there are many different options, but the one that seems to occupy the best part of the center is the carbon dividend plan, where all the money raised, or most of the money raised, is given back to the American people on an equal basis. So it doesn't grow the size of government. Most people end up getting more back than they pay in increased carbon. And most importantly, it drives a huge change in behavior, and it makes the alternative fuels much more economically viable.
Okay, and on that carbon pricing, so we are talking about more than just raising the gasoline tax, right?
Oh, much more so. And in fact, I think most people in the US, as we look at the electrification of automobility, see the gas tax as a declining source of possible revenue.
Okay, all right. Okay, Simon, is there another question?
Yeah, I've got a really good one here, which it's also kind of ties back into Earth shots, moon missions, etc., which is the interface between Earth observation and space technologies and climate R&D going forward. I mean, the Commission has announced that we're going to create a new Earth Observation Knowledge Center, if the terminology is correct, Patrick. And of course, with NASA doing a huge amount over the years in terms of Earth observation, I just wonder how you see these two worlds increasingly complementing and intersecting with each other as you start to roll out these multi-year programs on different areas of climate R&D.
Well, it's a great coincidence because as well as being chair of the steering committee of Mission Innovation, this year I'm what's called the lead co-chair of the Group on Earth Observation, which is a really enormous global coalition of 100 and so countries working together on the science of Earth observation and how we use that science to support policy on climate, on sustainable development goals, and disaster relief. And it's also a really good example of where there is a long track record of successful transatlantic collaboration between ourselves and colleagues in the relevant US agencies, which largely survives any sort of political sort of cyclical effects. So we've got a really strong collaboration. The co-chairs of this group are the US, the European Commission, China, and South Africa. And working together, we drive this agenda. And I think that it is more and more clear that things like satellite data or the sort of Earth-based in situ data, as we call it, the observations you can gather from ships or from observation stations on the Earth, or sort of crowd-generated data from populations, that we have increasingly the capacity with our digital infrastructures to process and analyze this data in new ways, and therefore to produce forward-looking findings for the sort of challenges we face. So, for example, the last ministerial meeting of the Group on Earth Observation took place in Canberra, in Australia, around the time of the really devastating forest fires that they had there about 2 years ago, and it was a really powerful example of how, in fact, data from EU satellites were being used to track the development of the fires and therefore to help with the response strategies that the local authorities were deploying in order to address that challenge, both in terms of the people having to move and also trying to fight the fires directly. And so I think that Earth observation and the capacity for Earth observation tools and data to contribute to policy making in these key areas is really fundamental, and is a really good example of where the world comes together. And they're a really good example of how North and South also cooperate very effectively.
Thank you, Patrick. Beth, do you have any quick thoughts on this? And then I'm going to ask the Congressman for his perspectives as the chair of the subcommittee on space and aeronautics.
Yeah, so I will just say that Earth observations are an extremely important part of the science of what we do on climate and how we look at the situation on the ground as it stands today. The Earth observations information on fleeting methane emissions, for example, that GEO and others are looking at is absolutely critical if we're going to get a handle on how to make sure that we are addressing those emissions and where they are coming from. So that's just a concrete example of something that we're looking at. But obviously NASA, NOAA to some extent, and of course our scientists within DOE are very involved in working with our partners overseas, and also with our interagency partners in the US government, where this is actually quite a big focus with USGS and lots of information that we in the United States are gathering that we share with the world, so that we can look at what's going on, what our resource base is, and the problems we need to address.
Great, thank you. And Congressman, I mean, is this now really a part of the sort of the political discussions within your subcommittee and elsewhere in Congress, how to strengthen the EU-US or even multilateral cooperation on Earth observation and space data?
Absolutely. And it's complicated, Simon. Right now, as of January, there are 3,372 operational satellites. So space traffic management is a huge issue. Increasingly, space debris becomes an enormous issue. But it's a very exciting place because we're having this explosion of the private sector doing sensing satellites up in space. And in fact, there's a piece of the Department of Commerce in the US right now that has a specific responsibility for trying to figure out what are the regulations in terms of what these private satellites, what information can they share, what's violations of privacy and the like. But given that SpaceX is talking about 10,000 more satellites and another 10,000, there's an enormous need for not just US and Europe, but US and everybody in the world, China, Russia, to come together on managing the low Earth orbit. But it was NASA that first picked up all the data on climate change. And so they're still leading on that. And to quote NASA's former chief scientist, Ellen Stofan, it's really important that NASA study all the planets. And the most important one is the one that we live on. And to that extent, the Biden NASA budget has a significant bump up in planetary science, which is very welcome.
And and actually at Horizon 2020, the Commission has a couple of very interesting projects that have been running for the last 5-6 years on space debris extraction, which were profiled at the last Research and Innovation Days, if I remember correctly, Patrick, but that's certainly something to watch going forward. Rich, shall we move on to COP? And perhaps you take the lead, and let's focus on what might realistically be achieved in Glasgow for climate and energy R&D.
Okay, so yes, COP26, November in Glasgow, the next global gathering to push forward with climate control internationally. Where do we begin on this? Dawn, could I start with you? With your role on the climate coalition in the House, what are you hoping to get out of this meeting in Glasgow?
In a perfect world, we leave with much stronger financial commitments from all the nations participating to make the investments in every part of how we offset climate, but especially adaptation. I think we all realize right now that while we want to do everything we can to prevent it, there's going to be an awful lot of mitigation and adaptation going on right now. You just see it in the United States, was probably less affected than many, many other nations, that the coastal resilience all along the Atlantic seaboard, I just think Norfolk, Virginia, is enormous. So when you then think about the Seychelles or Bangladesh or many of the other places that can be hit much harder, that COP26 begins to really think about that, makes a global commitment to helping these nations survive.
Okay, there is a helicopter, because I'm in Washington right now, which you might be hearing. It will pass. Okay, but Don, what is there a specific? You say to get the commitments from the member states in COP26. Is there a specific budget target you're looking for? Is there a specific commitment of some kind that would represent progress to you?
Rich, I almost any big commitment will represent progress.
Okay.
You know, we could compare to when Barack Obama was snatching the pig out of the fire in Copenhagen all those years ago. But I don't know what the specific Biden administration, John Kerry and others, have in mind for those specific.
Okay, Beth, I come to you then. What do you have in mind for COP26?
Well, certainly the department is not in the lead on climate negotiations. That is Secretary Kerry, as Congressman Beyer highlighted. But from our perspective, you know, we have traditionally used the COP as a platform to push forward on research and development, international research and development projects. And so we talked a little bit about mission innovation. We are actually hoping to launch a new mission within mission innovation on carbon dioxide capturing for COP. And so that's something we're trying to put together now as the department. So actually capturing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it.
Hold on, tell us a little more about that. Is that only in the US or is that internationally?
No, this would be through mission innovation. And so we would be working with partners in mission innovation around the world. Obviously, this is a technology that's been worked on in the United States, but it's also being worked on in Europe and other parts of the world. And this innovation challenge would set a challenge target for this program. And then our research and development institutions, labs around the world would work together to move forward on that particular technology.
Well, Beth, if I can just, I know that in Europe, the EU tried and largely failed to get coordination among the member states on climate capture and storage. I think in the end, it was really only Norway, not a member, who did anything serious about it. So what's different? I mean, obviously it's hard technologically, financially, and politically to get this going.
Well, there's a lot of interest in not just CCUS, which is carbon capture and storage, usually associated with petrochemical industries or the oil and gas industries, but this is actually capturing out of the air around us the carbon dioxide. And this is a new technology that, quite frankly, could be very commercial at some point. And so there is a general interest, not only from the perspective of addressing climate change, but also for a solution that might be a viable technology in various countries, and the private sector is interested in this as well, and has been doing some of the work on this, specifically in the United States, in conjunction with various other research programs in the US, including DOE.
Okay, all right. Well, Patrick, what then are you wanting from COP26? You, the commission.
Yeah, we, the Commission, I mean, it's also in the hands of Executive Vice President Timmermans, who's leading our charge on this. But I mean, I think there are maybe four things. I mean, firstly, clearly, we would like to see more and more countries committing to net zero as part of their upgraded nationally determined contributions. And that, you know, we've seen some encouraging signals from some partners in recent months, but it's clear that we need to all to go a lot further and a lot faster in order to achieve that. And part of achieving that is then also getting a really good understanding around the North-South sort of pact around our climate objectives, and finding lasting and fair solutions to the whole debate on climate finance and the amount of money that, you know, essentially is being transferred from the richer countries to the poor countries in order to, you know, achieve the burden sharing we need, in particular on things like adaptation that the Congressman has rightly highlighted. Thirdly, I'd like to see us put to bed once and for all the long-running, shall we say, discussions on the so-called rule book. I mean, basically the rules of the game of the climate talks, and in particular how we take credit or not for past achievements when we're sort of adding up the numbers. Because I think sometimes we're distracted by these technical discussions more than we should be, giving the urgency of the challenge. And finally, you know, speaking now from my sort of own responsibilities, like Beth, I would like to see us in Glasgow hardwire conversations on innovation, climate-related innovation, starting perhaps with clean energy around some of the missions in mission innovation. And there, you know, I certainly welcome the work that the US is doing on trying to, you know, identify some new topics for us to work with. But so that a regular part of the leaders' discussion when they come together for the annual COP meetings is about the progress that we're making on the research and innovation agenda that we've set. And I think that the platform that we've now launched with Mission Innovation 2.0 puts us in a really strong position to launch this new sort of decade of innovation around clean energy. And I'm pretty optimistic about that. Certainly something that the UK hosts have got in their mind. Huh?
Okay, but then we're talking about all this good cooperation and everything, or whatever. Dawn, you referred earlier to China and Russia. First on the question of China, on the whole area of climate R&D, should we be working with them? Can we work with them? How?
Yeah, I think President Biden's tried to articulate this far better than I can, that we have to stand up to them where we need to, on the Uyghurs, on Hong Kong, on international trade. We need to cooperate where we can, compete where we can, and then cooperate. And I'm hoping of the many places that we could and should be cooperating, climate is at the top. That China says good things about moving to net zero. And they certainly, their environment, their atmosphere is driving them to that. But I think we've been disappointed in what they've actually made happen so far. But they have the resources, they have the scientists to make enormous progress. And hopefully we can cooperate together and make that happen.
Well, is there any specific way that they can be encouraged to do so?
Well,
something that Congress could push forward, for instance.
I don't think Congress is in a position to do it right now. I mean, we are, for example, they just had votes this morning in the Science Committee on doubling the size of our National Science Foundation budget and then tripling it, or the Endless Frontiers Act in the Senate. And it's basically huge bipartisan majorities positioned as a way to compete against China. So it's China is our reigning bad guy right now, and it's
so that's interesting. So left and right in the U.S. can agree on not liking China is basically what this amounts to.
And at least for a left of center person like me, I still think we need to look for as many ways for constructive engagement as we can, without ignoring the things that we hate about their government.
Okay, Patrick, the EU position on China has been rather tortured by the trade deal that the EU negotiated at the end of last year, and then seemed to be having second thoughts about. So when it comes to climate, what are you trying to do with China?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that China has to be part of the resolution of the climate challenge. I mean, if we don't carry China with us, then, given the scale and given the sort of proportion of global emissions which are coming out of China at the moment, we're not going to achieve what we need to achieve. So we must have China with us. And I mean, just to answer your previous question a little bit more directly, we do have China as an active member in mission innovation. So they are sitting with us in the steering committee, and they were leading, in particular, the mission on the power sector and how to work to a point where we are able to integrate 100% of intermittent renewables into the power sector in our national energy systems. Now, if they are willing to talk about the technologies that are needed to achieve that goal, that for me is an encouraging sign that they too are committed to the same direction of travel in terms of clean energy. Now, having said that, just as the US is grappling with its own strategy towards China, I mean, the European Union has a sort of well-articulated policy, which is a sort of combination of coordination and collaboration where that works, competition where that's necessary, and a recognition that in some areas we are increasingly sort of strategic rivals, and that we need also to take a hard-nosed and sort of committed look at some of the human rights issues that the competition has mentioned, or some of the sort of unfair commercial practices that we're confronted with, and try and address those. And that, of course, was at the heart of what we were trying to achieve with the trade agreement with China, which is now still under discussion with our member states and with the European Parliament, pending, I hope, its conclusion sooner rather than later.
Well, okay, but Beth, then from the U.S. point of view, are there any particular initiatives that you are planning or thinking about bilaterally with China on climate R&D?
We have had several initiatives in the past, particularly the Clean Energy Research and Technology Center, that has completed its work. And I think, we are watching the situation carefully. We have to look at engagement with China with eyes wide open, particularly in the Department of Energy, in terms of, the important work that we do in a variety of areas that are important for the security of our own nation's energy sector and the world's energy sector particularly. So there are some areas where we're still cooperating, particularly in nuclear safety and security in terms of nuclear energy. But I think it remains to be seen how we're going to approach moving forward with China more specifically.
Okay, well, a last question from me then for all of you, and that is, on this whole subject of climate R&D, the emphasis has been on cooperation through mission innovation and other things. But in the end, are we competing or cooperating with one another on these? This issue has come out very strongly on vaccines, for instance, at the moment, with with the Biden administration surprising the EU by suggesting that the pharma companies, the patents for these should be made available to the third world. Are we going to get into the same issues when it comes to really cool climate technologies? Who's going to own those?
Do you want me to go first?
Yes. So, Patrick, go ahead. I yield.
No, Don, please.
Yes. As Tom Friedman's book from 20 years ago probably said, that the people that control the green energy will control the economy in the 21st century. So you're going to have some of both, and it's necessary. We have to cooperate, and competition is what drives human behavior.
So you don't think there should be? You don't think there should be any change in intellectual property rights to permit the wider use of these new technologies?
I think we're only beginning to live with the Biden decision on the vaccine intellectual property.
Okay.
Now,
See how that works out.
You're taking us into a discussion which could last all afternoon. But I agree with the congressman that there's this American expression that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that we can collaborate and have a really rich and mutually beneficial upstream conversation about developing and exploiting clean energy technologies, other climate technologies, and yet be sort of hard-nosed and supportive of our respective industries in making commercial advantage of that. And I think if you look at the wind energy sector and the way that the European sort of community around wind energy has built up and now maintains a strong global lead in some of the important technologies in the wind sector, which is exploding around the world. I think we can be very, very, very proud of that achievement and hope that it'll be mirrored in other sectors too. And the fact that the European Union has been so single-minded over the past years in its commitment to these technologies, I think puts us in a strong place to succeed for the future as well.
Okay. Beth, any comment on that?
Well, I think we already are competing and collaborating at the same time. I mean, there are many countries in my regular portfolio that I work on, like Korea, for example, where we are collaborating on battery technology and advanced, cleaner, more efficient, and more able to store more energy style batteries, while at the same time, our companies are competing neck and neck. And so, we're already there in several sectors. But I think the role of governments, and particularly institutions like the Department of Energy, is to find ways to collaborate in advanced sciences, to be looking at the horizon, to be looking at what future commercialization might be possible, but to collaborate and get that those technologies to a point where we can look at that from the private sector perspective, and that is largely what DOE does and what the point of the Department of Energy and our laboratories is. It's not to develop fantastic new technologies like hydraulic fracturing or fusion energy. I didn't get to speak on that one, but we do have an active fusion energy program at the Department of Energy that's working with Japan and Germany as well as ITER. So those are all things that are done in the public good. But we have to be careful at the same time. And there is a much stronger focus in this administration on securing our supply chains. And so everything that we do when we look at collaboration and competition, we do with the lens of making sure that we have secure supply chains, whether that be in solar panels or in critical materials.
Okay. Simon, over to you.
Well, it just falls to me to wrap up what's been an absolutely fascinating set of discussions. Thanks first and foremost to you, the audience, for taking the time to join us this afternoon. As you know, it's a It's a very hot news day, and there are plenty of other stories about the EU-US cooperation flying around. But this has been, I think, a really fascinating set of debates. And we thank you for all of your questions as well. I'm sorry we didn't have the time to get to all of them, but we will keep them on record, because we are reconvening for our next major public conference on September 7 and 8, a hybrid event in Brussels and internationally webcast, where we will be discussing compete or cooperate. What's the new normal in global R&D? So a number of these topics, from hydrogen to China to space and so forth, will be picked up again. And we look forward to having you join us for that. But in the meantime, I would sincerely like to thank Patrick Child, Beth Urbanus and Don Bayer for taking the time. It really has been a very enriching set of discussions. We wish you and your colleagues great success in your ongoing endeavors, projects, negotiations, and the like. And so thank you once again for being with us, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.